Well, hello and welcome back to the Conflict Skills Podcast. I'm your host, professional mediator Simon Good. I set up this podcast to provide free resources and tools for dealing with conflict. So if that sounds like the kind of thing that's useful for you, please consider pressing subscribe. In the episode today, I'm going to be talking about the cumulative effects of stress and how it relates to workplace conflict. I'll address some of the common misconceptions that we have, including ideas like work-life balance or sort of segmenting or compartmentalizing the different aspects of our life that causes stress, and talking about the interconnectedness of all of these different elements, both the different parts of our lives, but also how these might have a reciprocal pattern over time. I'll also talk about some of the ways that our capacity for dealing with conflict changes when we experience stress, how our patterns of our thoughts and feelings and perception and behavior and effectively our ability for self-control all are changed when we become more stressed. And unfortunately, this often results in a little bit of a negative spiral where we're feeling a little bit wound up and wired. It doesn't take as much to push our buttons. We tend to react, and then what do you know? We've made either that situation worse and created probably a bit more stress for ourselves than what we were already dealing with, or we've created a parallel stressor that now we need to deal with. If work was already in a pretty terrible state, now I've increased the stress that I need to deal with by, whinging too much to one of my friends or to my partner or something like that. So in the final section of the podcast, I'll talk about some of the strategies that we can use for managing stress, especially if you feel like you're experiencing a bit of this cumulative build-up yourself. Thank you very much for listening. I really do appreciate it. If the episode today is useful for you and you would like to support the podcast, the best thing that you could do is press subscribe if you'd like to, but just leaving a positive review and a comment if you're listening or watching on a platform where you have that option to do that. That's incredibly helpful. So thank you very much in advance if that's something that you're prepared to do. So you've probably heard this idea of work-life balance, and it gives us this impression that maybe the work part of our life is different to the life part of our life. I mean, isn't that an interesting dichotomy, and even to consider for a moment that maybe work isn't living in a way, so we're being paid to go and spend 8 hours a day or something, not living effectively. I mean, I don't know that analogy is completely untrue, to be honest, with some of the different jobs that I've worked in where I haven't felt like I was particularly alive, if you know what I mean. I lost my spark or I lost my mojo or something like that. But this idea of work-life balance, it kind of implies that can manage each of these areas of our life separately. So when I'm having stressful times in my work or aspects of my work or areas of my responsibility there that are challenging, that I need to deal with that on the work side of things and effectively need to stop it from trickling into the life side of things, the family and friends and your relationship with your partner or romantic relationships in this area. And of course, this isn't true. When we're experiencing stress in our work, it impacts on our personal life. It's literally across the board. Every interaction that you've got, every thought that you're having, every little self-care habit that you engage in, all of the small kind of decisions that you make about incidental kind of things through the day. If you're going through an incredibly challenging time at work, then all of those different aspects of your quote-unquote personal life can be impacted. And we've also all seen the negative impact on our relationships when we're experiencing stress in one area of our life. If you're going through a hard time at work, it often makes it really difficult to have time to listen to your partner or a friend if they're going through challenging times. It might push your buttons or trigger you to hear similar kind of experiences that you're having, for example. Or it might just be that you feel like your bucket's already full. You've emptied yourself of your energy for the day at your work and your role, so to speak. And then when you come home, the last thing that you want is to spend more time. It's often the way that we phrase this, isn't it? Like listening to someone whinge or listening to someone complain. Should we listen to our partner talk about negative aspects that's going on in their work? I mean, this is in itself a really interesting values judgment that we make, isn't it? Like, again, all of us have an idea of what work-life balance is. Some couples, I know, they have an agreement that they don't talk about work, or they only talk about work for a certain amount of time because they don't want the entire evening to be spent whinging about work. But in other relationships, it's not such a big deal, and you look to each other for emotional support for what's going on at work. But whatever the reality is that you're going through, when work is challenging, it impacts your personal relationships. And it's often either making you less available to support other people in those kind of situations like I've been describing there, or you might be more negative towards them, more quick to react, more quick to be pessimistic about assuming why they've acted the way that they are. They've cancelled, they couldn't be bothered, I'm so sick of this. Every time I spend time and get dressed and get ready, they send me a text at the last minute saying that they can't come. I mean, if you've had a really hard day at work, of course that would be incredibly irritating. Whereas if you were feeling more balanced and, in a happier kind of state of mind already, the fact that you've already gotten ready might not be such a big deal. And in fact, you might decide to just go out yourself anyway, or go and meet somebody else, or, just you'll adapt and you won't spend as much time on the negative rumination. But in the moment, we don't think about that. We're not aware of that. The other person is being unreasonable. That's why I'm upset, right? It's not because of what's going on at work, because of this separation between work and life. So if we understand that there is actually an interconnectedness between these different areas, it helps us to be aware of this cumulative buildup of stress. The other side is true as well. Like, we often experience challenges at work when we're going through difficulties in our personal life. I know divorce and separation is an incredibly common aspect of difficulty for managers to manage when their staff are going through divorces and separation, because they're not themselves, like they're not showing up with their regular full capacity. And if you're in a high pressure role and there's a lot at stake, it can be very difficult to make these decisions around effectively ethical dilemmas along the way. Like, how much leeway do you give a staff member who's going through a divorce? They're not sleeping, that's contributing to, a bit of decline in their well-being, and then that's affecting their thinking power and their communication skills or something. And you want to be a supportive and compassionate and kind manager, but it's very difficult to decide how much leeway to give and how much flexibility to offer. So instead, I think it's better to approach this work-life idea from this sort of lens of the fact that these are related, and therefore we need to deal with them in an interconnected kind of way. So even with that staff member, you might be talking to them about, look, what do you need to do to keep your head above water over the next week or two? Or these are the concerns with work behavior. This is what needs to change, or these are my expectations. I'd like to talk about what supports you might need or what flexibility seems reasonable on your end, because I don't want to seem like, I'm just cracking the whip, so to speak, without any idea of the fact that you might be going through challenges yourself. And of course, that would mean that your capacity is up and down depending on what's happening. It also means when we want to think about self-care, we could either deal with it on the work or the life side of things, so to speak. So when you're going through challenges at work, there might be options for you to deal with it on the work front, like being assertive with the boss who's got unrealistic expectations, talking to a colleague about something that's stressing you out and getting a bit more support, like doing debriefing more frequently or something like that. Slowing down and not doing as much at work might be a very simple option to reduce the amount of stress that you're going through, at least in the short term. But we could also deal with it in our personal life side of things as well. This is changing our diet, making sure that we're exercising, hanging out with the people that fill up our bucket when we're feeling like we're a little bit drained. And our capacity for dealing with stress, and that includes conflict, goes up and down over time. For some of us, this is like minute by minute, or at the very least hour by hour. Like in the morning, I might be in a pretty clear kind of headspace and I'm ready to go. I can deal with robust kind of conversations pretty easily and not get frazzled and upset. If I haven't had as much sleep, or I've been really busy, or I've needed to do a lot of thinking power, then I'm much quicker to react. And I need to understand that my capacity for dealing with conflict isn't stable over time. It's up and down, and it really is related to those other aspects of what's going on for me, like what I've been eating, or how much sleep I've had, or the other activities that I've been engaged in. And then longer term, it will go up and down as well. Like I might have good weeks and bad weeks, or good months and bad months, or even good years and bad years, or even longer. And that's okay. That's normal, given the fact that my life will be up and down over time as well. There'll be times when I've had young kids and not much sleep and I have different expectations for myself. Or I probably should say that I should have different expectations of myself, because when I look back to when I had a young child, I still thought that I should be up at the same time and working at the same level and delivering the same amount of output, which of course wasn't very realistic, especially because I had all of these other things going on in my personal life. Like, we were moving cities, going interstate and changing jobs a few times, and all of these different aspects. But I thought about it as separate, work life. These are different. I should be showing up to work and being a performer. Like, what's wrong with me? I don't know if that resonates with any of you, especially if you consider yourself to be a bit of a high performer and you're not. Like, it's really stressful. And I think almost there can be a little bit of an element of, I say I'm beating myself up about it, but what I'm really talking about there is shame, especially in the moment. You feel just so crap about the fact that you're not delivering the output that you think you should be capable of. When we see this buildup of stress in our life or at work, personal life or at work, it impacts us in many different ways. But I think one of the helpful ways to categorize these impacts are those 5 aspects of self that I've talked about in previous episodes of the podcast. Our thoughts, our thinking change as we become more stressed. We develop more black and white understandings of situations. It's their fault, they're wrong, and I'm right. But there's all this other information that I'm not aware of. And if I can pause and take a few deep breaths and reduce a little bit of the stress that I'm experiencing in the moment, it gives me that ability to step back and zoom out and see the bigger picture. And all of a sudden, my thinking changes. It moves from that more negative, more black and white, more generalized assumptions about the world to a more nuanced, detail-focused perspective, which then means that it's much more helpful for me as I think about options for how to respond. I probably need to choose the right timing to do it, given the fact that my capacity will be up and down over time. And one of the cues that I could consider first is, how's my thinking at the moment? Like, what are the recurring thoughts or stories or, those kind of narratives that are coming up in our head, the conversations that we're replaying or that kind of thing. And if it's very negative, very emotional, very black and white, that might be a sign that I'm experiencing a bit of a buildup of stress and I need to calm myself down first so that I can think more clearly. The next aspect that you'll often see this cumulative buildup of stress affect us is our feelings. We tend to feel very strong emotions. One of the ways that I've learnt to think about emotion as a mediator is that emotions often come when a boundary is being crossed. Now, often in conflict, the 2 emotions that tend to come up are fear or some version of fear, like I just feel uncomfortable, I'm just worried, I'm just concerned about the impact of the stuff or something like that. It's something about that. It's like, this isn't right. And then on the other side of things is anger, I can't believe you've done this, the indignation, the strong emotions in that end of the spectrum. And they're designed, like the reason that we have these emotions, one way to think about it at least, is that they help us to act in the way that our brain thinks that we're going to need to act next. And so when we're in conflict, we have these 2 options that have tended to result in survival, which is fight or flight. So we've got these very strong emotions that come up when we're in conflict, anger and fear, which of course are connected to fight or flight. And they're pretty good options for dealing with a physical threat. If someone's going to attack you, I could fight them or scare them off or something, or I could flee, run away. But they're not particularly helpful when I'm dealing with my wife or with my son or with my business partner or with my boss at work. So we need to recognize that when we're experiencing strong emotions, but particularly the anger and the fear, what's going on for us is that our brain is interpreting this situation as being potentially threatening. That's why we're experiencing this buildup of emotion. And it's another one of the cues that we can look for as a way to know when we need to calm ourselves down a little bit to engage in some of the self-care, self-regulation strategies that work for you. The third way that stress impacts us, especially over time, is that our physical body tends to change. You might notice a buildup of adrenaline, for example, or cortisols, the stress hormone that our brain creates. It makes us feel a bit jittery, a little bit on edge. It makes us pace back and forth and tap something on the desk. The reason that we have these physical reactions is that it's getting us ready for physical action. Like we have an increase in blood pressure and blood sugar and oxygen levels when we go into this fight or flight kind of mode, when we experience stress, because it's getting us ready for this fight or flight way of operating. And again, this isn't ideal depending on the situation that you're in. If you're going back to your car after a dinner out in the evening and someone's following you back and they might want to mug you, then it's good for your body to go into this fight or flight way of operating and for these physical changes to be happening in your body. Because if you need to defend yourself, better to be safe than sorry, so to speak, at least from an evolutionary perspective. But it's not ideal when it's 2 a.m. and I'm trying to sleep and I'm thinking about this difficult work conversation that I had that day, or I'm thinking about the challenging client interaction that's likely to happen the next morning. So again, when we experience this buildup of stress, the escalation in heart rate, difficulty breathing, clammy or sweating a little bit, pacing back and forth, being a little bit jittery, even your voice quavering a little bit, these again can be signs that we might need to do something in terms of self-regulation to deal with that buildup of stress. The fourth way that stress tends to impact us, especially as it relates, to conflict, is our perception changes. When we become more stressed, we think about situations in much more of a black and white kind of way, and we don't focus on the detail and the nuance. So the challenge is that it's difficult to know when we're doing this, isn't it? It's almost like we're the goldfish in the water and we can't see the water because we're swimming around in it. So for me, I find it helpful to just take, a few minutes if possible and follow protocols that help me to zoom out or to help me to focus on a higher level of detail. So if I'm talking about conflict with one of my colleagues, I might zoom out by thinking about time, like how has this changed over the last year or two? How would I map it if I was going to put it in a curve, just going up and down of the better times and the worst times? Or how does it relate to other changes that's been going on within the team? Or which particular situations do I find that I'm having conflict with this person, and which situations is it okay? Like there's no particular method that's needed. It's just you can either zoom out and add more context, add more information, or you could zoom in and add more detail. Which specific situations is this happening in? Or you could adjust your perception to a different kind of area, like focus on your senses. Wiggle your toes and feel the feeling of your socks in your boots at the moment. What does that feel like? Feel the feeling of your tongue in your mouth. In any one moment, our perception actually has so much more information coming in than we can pay attention to. So our brain needs to decide what to focus on. So we can kind of take the steering wheel back in terms of the control panel of our perception by doing an activity related to mindfulness and paying attention to what we're sensing in the moment. This also tends to be quite helpful to calm ourselves down inherently because it connects us to the present and stops our brain from spinning about the past and the future, which often are the things that cause us to be quite worked up and feel less comfortable, like it's introducing this element that things might not be okay. And then the final aspect that changes as we experience more stress is our volition, our behavior. We blurt out a comment without thinking. We start speaking before the other person's finished. We mess up our words. We don't articulate ourselves very carefully. We overreact when the other person's trying to push our buttons. It's hard, you know what I mean? Like the reason that this happens is, again, it's because of the way that our brain is in interpreting the situation. And if it perceives a higher level of threat, historically it's been better that we act first. If there's a predator, like a bear chasing you, just escape, just start running. Don't spend time thinking about the optimum escape plan. But of course, when we deal with workplace conflict, it's not good to be acting without thinking. When we go into this fight or flight mode, it's a bit like our brain is redlining the system, like putting the accelerator pedal to the metal in the car. You're moving fast, that's true, but you're not necessarily steering very well. You don't necessarily have a lot of control over the direction. So what can we do when we're experiencing this cumulative buildup of stress? For me, I tend to think about self-care and stress management in 3 different categories. First, it's during the conflict or during the difficult conversation. What can I do? And the 2 tools that tend to work for me are breathing and mindfulness. So the breathing protocol that I often follow is, deep breathing is the goal is at a fundamental level. So you should extend the breath in and the breath out. The optimum amount of time for the breath is 5.5 seconds, I should say. So I normally count to 6 breathing in and count to 6 breathing out. And it's more effective if you use your nose rather than your mouth. The final step that I add, and most of this is described by Andrew Huberman in the model that he calls piston breathing, is that you pause during the breath in. So I'm breathing using my nose. I'm focusing mostly on the breath out. I'm trying to breathe slowly and deeply where possible. And I'm going to pause during the breath in. So I might breathe in and pause, then keep breathing in, take a last sip of air in, and then breathe out all of the way. And then breathe in, take a sip, take a pause, take another little breath in, and then breathe out all of the way. And I often find that 3 or 4 breath cycles like this are all it takes for me to feel a little bit more calm, a little bit more composed. Now, the first time you're doing it, you might just extend that first breath out all of the way. Just keep breathing out, keep breathing out, keep breathing out. And sometimes we're a little bit surprised actually at how much air is in our lungs. It obviously creates physical space within our chest because our lungs are like balloons that blow up and deflate when you've breathed out. So when we fully breathed out all of the way, some people experience almost a little bit of a tingling sensation or something like that. For me, I use this almost strategically, especially when I'm feeling like the blood is rushing to my face as I'm angry about something that, a stupid comment that someone's making in a meeting, and I feel this knee-jerk reaction. I want to correct them. I want to put them in their place. I want to interrupt them, but I need to take more of a tactical route. So I choose to take the deep breathing approach, bite my tongue, and then, ask them a question that puts them on the spot or explain my case and my perspective in more of a considered way once I've had a moment to calm down. So deep breathing is a really effective option. The other tool that tends to work during the conversation is mindfulness, paying attention to what you can feel. How's the air in the room? What's the temperature? Is there any breeze or is it still? Wiggle your toes and feel the feeling of your socks in your boots. Which parts of your back is touching the chair in the lumbar support, or what does your posture look like at the moment? Within your body, what's going on? Is there a remnant of the coffee or the last meal that you've got in your mouth? Are there any smells that you can smell? Is there any sounds beyond, my voice or the person that's talking, background noise, that kind of thing? We just have to pay attention to our senses. And again, it has this really effective way of anchoring us in the present moment that tends to be very helpful when we're thinking about something like workplace conflict. So for me, mindfulness and breathing are probably the 2 go-to strategies, but you might come up with different options that work for you during a conversation to deal with that buildup of stress. After the conflict or after the difficult conversation would be the next opportunity to think about self-care and stress management, going for a quick walk around the building, having something to eat, washing your face, writing it down and journaling, talking to someone for a quick debrief. You'll need to decide what options are going to work for you. But what you don't want to do is to carry that buildup of stress into the next conversation that you go into. If you're going in at a 6 out of 10 level of stress, that's going to mean that it takes less to push your buttons and send you up to the point where you effectively lose it and you're not thinking as clearly, you become more reactive effectively. So taking a few minutes to just reset means that you're going in from a better foundation from the word go. And then the final way of thinking about managing stress is over the longer term. These are things like the evenings or the weekends or even your holidays and how you spend your time. Choosing strategically about the kinds of activities that fill you up, that mean that you get to a Monday and you feel like you've actually had a weekend, as opposed to feeling like, you actually still need some recovery from the weekend activity that you've been engaged in. Sometimes these small little tweaks that we make, and it's often creating opportunities that break the script, so to speak, like a nice meal out with your family once a month, if that's something that you haven't been doing lately, or planning a trip away and having something to look forward to, or reorganizing something at work so that you've got structured time to really concentrate and focus instead of constantly bouncing between tasks, or having emails in a culture where people expected you to get back to them on the spot. Like, a lot of the time, the changes that we make in our work make significant benefits to the way that we experience stress in our personal life, and vice versa. If you can make tweaks and make changes in your personal life, that often increases your capacity at work. Anyway, that's all my thoughts about the topic. I suppose my question is, what do you think? If it's been useful for you, I'd love to hear. If you've got a question, I'd be happy for you to send it through. But I would really like to know what you make of all of this, what resonates, and what are your thoughts? What do you experience in terms of that cumulative impact of stress? And what do you find helpful for managing it? The best way to get in touch is email, and the email address is podcast@simongoode.com. So it's podcast@simongoode.com. If you'd like to learn about me, my workplace mediation, or the training workshops that I run, you can head over there. I've got a new workshop launching soon, TM. I think it's been now literally 2 years that I've been working on this first online course that I'm hoping to launch, but I swear that it's getting close, but I don't want to make any promises about timeframes and that kind of thing, but stay tuned. It's the essential foundations for managing workplace conflict. It's self-access online course. It's designed so that you can do it as a single person or with a group of staff and sort of pause to discuss as you go. So yeah, if that sounds like something that's useful for you, please check out the website because you'll see information coming soon. TM. Thank you so much for listening. If it's been helpful, please consider leaving a positive review. Otherwise, all the best managing the workplace conflict situations that you're dealing with over the next week or two. Thank you very much for listening. Bye for now.